Right, so hello everyone, welcome to this session. We're going to be talking about inner source at Citi, so hopefully you're in the right room. So who am I? I'm Katrina Novakovic, I'm Citi's open source culture lead, and I lead inner source at Citi. I've been at Citi now for about 2 years, and I'm going to be talking about what we do at Citi, but also some general things that are happening in industry as well. So today we're going to look at architecting your inner source program, so how you put this together, how inner source actually adds value. So there's lots of kind of generic benefits, but I'll give you some examples of how it's actually benefited Citi, some common challenges and how you can possibly overcome them, and then also how inner source prepares you for open source contribution. So let's look at architecting your inner source program. So first of all, what is inner source? So inner source is applying open source development practices internally within an organization. And we found that it's actually key to communicate this message to people internally as well. There's some confusion. So the last thing you want to happen is for people to put inner source projects out there in the open. So it's important to distinguish the difference. And also within your organization, see if there's any other kind of things that may be misunderstood. So for example, a lot of people are using GitHub Enterprise, and people don't always know the difference between that and the public GitHub as well. So have a look to see what kind of confusion there may be, and just make sure you address those. So at Citi, we want to foster an inner source culture where teams share ideas and collaborate together on common goals to deliver impactful solutions. We want developers to collaborate on code and projects beyond their immediate assigned area, so across geos and lines of business to open up silos. And we want everything to be in the open, but internally. So that includes code, documentation and issues, but also how decisions are made. It's really good to document those and just make people aware of how stuff happens. So why do inner source? So there's lots of general benefits for doing inner source, especially if you kind of put this in your search engine, you'll get a long list. But you need to identify the benefits for your organization. So to start, you can look at how does inner source align with your organization's business strategy, objectives, mission statement, cultural values, and then what challenges will inner source address? And if you find that there's no alignment, then you should really question whether you should be doing it at all. So why do we do it at Citi? Well, we wanted to make developers' lives easier, and this is all kinds of things. So it can help people to discover projects and what other teams are doing and what they're working on. It can help people to reuse code to avoid duplication of effort. You can combine resources and experience to reduce maintenance costs. You can get exposure from peers and other leadership, and you can accelerate sharing of best practices. And then we also want it to drive and evolve Citi's culture by encouraging cross-function collaboration, diversity of thought, skill development, innovation, to enable developers to add value across Citi, to become a more open engineering team in a stereotypically closed environment, to identify and reward developers, and to help people transition to open source. And then ultimately, we want to solve common problems and release better quality code quicker, to accelerate technical growth and progression, to retain best-in-class talent, to strengthen Citi's position as a leader and authority in the finance technology innovation, and ultimately to develop the best tools, application and solutions for our customers and clients. So there's a lot there, but it's really looking at how we make developers' lives easier and to drive and evolve Citi's culture. So Citi is a global organisation. We've got headquarters in New York, but we've got employees worldwide. And with large organisations, silos fall, where teams are creating their own systems and people are just doing their own things. So why does this happen? Why are there silos? Well, there's kind of two areas I'm going to look at. So one is where teams are just unaware of who other teams are and what they're working on. But then you also get the case where teams are aware. They know what other people are doing, but they just don't want to use their systems. They think that their requirements are unique. They can build things better. They can build things faster. And so therefore you have duplicative effort where people are doing the similar systems. So taking this and looking at what we were trying to achieve, there's a whole long list of stuff you can do when you implement an inner source program, but we decided to focus on implementing tooling. So having a project catalogue to help people discover what projects are out there, and just to increase that awareness of what other people are working on. We also wanted to implement contribution metrics to encourage people to collaborate together, and so you can see, you can attribute and recognise who's doing what and what people are working on. And then also integration with other internal systems. So when we recognise people, we want to give them badges and rewards that link up to other systems. And also personalisation. So rather than just getting a catalogue that shows you a whole list of projects, if it knows that you're working on Java or Python, it can prioritise those and shows those to you first above other options. We also wanted to share knowledge, so we wanted to document best practices and also to share collaboration stories, so to inspire and encourage people to collaborate more across the organisation. So I've spoken a few times about an inner source project. So this is kind of like, what do you inner source? What is a project? So a project can be many things. So for example, it could be a single library that you want to share with people. It could be one repository for a project, or it could be multiple repositories, or it could be any of these things. The reason why I think it's important to discuss this before you start your programme is if you're going to be building tooling, you kind of want to know what fields to add in that tooling. We had it where we assumed that one project would have one repo, and then when we started building the tooling, we had to put additional fields in and then move things around on the UX, and it got quite complicated. So actually defining this up front is very helpful. And then how do you decide what types of projects to include? So if you kind of sell inner source as being, a way to collaborate and do all this stuff, a lot of senior leaders will be like, that's great, let's just inner source all of our projects. But depending on how big your organisation is, you could have tens of thousands of projects, which have all varying quality. Or you could just have a select few, which is often how inner source programs start. You kind of pilot it with a few projects and you grow over time. There are many organisations that they try and inner source all their projects, but they're a bit smaller, but you could have 1,000 projects or something in your inner source catalogue. It's not necessarily one's better or worse, it just depends what's right and suitable for your organisation. And then also, what type of projects do you want to have? You can have these high-value strategic kind of business-critical systems that you want to encourage people to collaborate on. They're supported by a good development team, they meet all security requirements, and they tend to be good ones to inner source. But then you've got the opposite end of the spectrum where you've got these early stage projects. So this is where you want to encourage innovation amongst the organisation, but they may not have like all the security and process things that you need. These are kind of ones that you want to spin up quickly, but you need the environments and things to do so. So looking at what you have available, what environments you have, and what types of projects you want to inner source. And then at Citi, we have a suitability criteria. So if you want to register an inner source project, you have to be able to define what problems it solves, and it should be a new problem. So if there's an inner source project for the same problem, then we ask, why aren't you collaborating with that team? There may be a good reason. It may solve the same problem but be slightly different, and it may be right to have two separate projects, but really it should be a new problem. It should be a generic reuse, so if it's very specific to what you and your team are doing and no one else can benefit, there's not really much benefit in sharing it further. And we also ask that there's a team to lead and maintain it, to help onboard people, to answer questions. We have actually recently been looking at having nobody owning a project and just being community-led to see how that works. That might work better for things like libraries and things like that. So again, there's no right or wrong way. It's just what do you want to do within your organisation. I'm also very keen of quality over quantity. So we've got a quality criterion standards that we have to meet. So simple things like your repository has to be open. If no one can view your source code, then it kind of defeats the point. But also things like issue trackers, documentation, all these other things that could be kept in different areas. We then ask that there's a README and a contributing.md files present, but not just present. I actually manually check them all and to ensure they're of a certain quality. So the README file, it's not much use if it doesn't tell you how you can actually build the project yourself. So there should be steps, and we actually do a test where we give it to a developer not part of the project team to run through those instructions to try and just build and use the project. If they get stuck, they work with the team to improve the README file, and then once that's done, we can then publish it internally. Same with the contributing file, you have to be able to actually contribute back to the project. And the processes can be different per project, it just has to be clear. And then we're also piloting an inner source incubator for people that have ideas that they want to test. And this avoids all kind of the red tape of an organisation that I think we're all aware of. So there's kind of lots of benefits of what we're doing. So I'll give you some examples now within Citi of how inner source has actually added value. So the first example is around code reuse. So there was an internal contest in China where people were asked to create projects to increase innovation and that sort of things. And there ended up being 3 people from 3 separate teams who had a similar idea around a lightweight database deployment tool. And they decided to actually collaborate together to make this tool. So the tool, they wanted to improve database change management and focus on the schema compare and change deploy area. And they wanted to make it easy to use and automated as well. So when they were working together, they put this into the inner source incubator area that we have. And this just made it visible to other people within the organisation. So everything they were developing on, they did in the open. And a short while after, while they were developing it, a team within the organisation found the code and thought, oh, this is exactly the same problem that we want to do. So they went to use the software, but then found out it didn't quite meet their needs. So they spoke to the original 3 people and said, hey, this is great, but we want to kind of contribute to the project and enhance it. And that's what they did. And then shortly after, another team did that and another team did that. So the type of enhancements were to support different database schemas and vendors. But actually, in the end, I think there was about 6 or 7 teams that were all working on this one same project. And if you think about the amount of duplication it would have been, not just writing the code, but going through all the process and the red tape stuff that has to happen, it saved time and it led to a better quality product. And if you remember back when I was saying about what we were trying to achieve, it was to make developers' lives easier, which this did. And then also things like helping change the culture by collaborating more, sharing information. So all of this meets our goals, really. And then another example, this is a non-technical example. So there was a developer that had a governance process that he needed to go through for his product, just speaking in a bit general terms here. And he started off by himself and with no prior knowledge of what was involved and what he had to do. So he was looking at for like internal documentation. He came across stuff, but it was a painfully slow process. The information that he found was outdated. He then, I think at one point, he ended up finding some approval process. He had to get his manager's approval, go through it all. And then by the time he was on to the 5th approval that he needed, the person turned around and said, actually, your use case isn't valid. You don't need to do any of this. And then connected the guy to the right person and laid out exactly what he needed to do, and it was done very quickly. So this is an example of how connecting with the right people can save you time. But it's not just a story of connection, because you have to find these people, and these 2 people know it, but if you don't know they exist. So the next part of the story is really to document that, get rid of that outdated information, update those processes so the next person that comes along can just read that documentation and not have to find someone. So some common challenges. So this is what we kind of always hear, is that how do I get users and contributors for my project? Well, the example I gave previously about the database one is that, if there's a real use case for that project, people will come. The people were just working on it, and then people discovered it in the catalogue and then wanted to join in and collaborate. So if you've got a good project and it's available and discoverable for people, you should be able to get people using it. And then they wanted to contribute it to build upon it. And part of the reason they wanted to contribute was because the maintainers and the project leads were so willing and collaborative. Other times, if people...
That's a really good question, because this is fundamental to the problem we've got.
Yeah.
You've got a team that's running good software. They've got no objective. It's overhead for them to run it on behalf of 20 other teams. And the senior management in that division don't support them in getting extra resource to provide that onward support. So whilst I hear what you're saying is, and I think you've got, I love your incubation idea, so everyone can jump in. But when there's already a team that's got a solution, they're often really unwilling to start, why would I support all these other teams? Just interested in how you got around that.
That is the next slide, internal policy. That's a different challenge. I'll get to it, don't worry, but thank you. Very valid. So getting users and contributors is an issue. So the next one is, once you do get users and contributors, this can lead to poor quality contributions, and this kind of runs into what you're saying. If you're a small team and you're receiving poor quality contributions, you're like, oh, I can't accept this, and you reject it. But at the same time, you want to encourage those contributions. So how do you get around this? Well, the answer is to kind of mentor people, invest in them. But then you get the challenges: I haven't got enough time, and you can do the whole. The other problem is, if you spend loads of time developing one person for one contribution, you don't know if they're going to contribute to that project again. So you could be wasting weeks. and then not really get any benefit longer term. So trying to have like training sessions that you can record and direct people to, they may not watch it, but it could be there. And then just mentoring and helping people and helping others. So there's one project that kind of has champions from different areas and groups. So if you have a problem, you can go and see them. But if you've got a smaller team, it is a bit trickier to do. I haven't got all the answers, but, but I'll cover some more of the challenges in a bit as well. And then with metrics. So metrics are fairly easy to gather if you're getting stuff from issue trackers and repos and things like that. Part of the problem with InnoSource is if you've got a team where it's their core projects, they work on it day in and day out, you don't necessarily want to be giving them badges and stuff just for their normal day-to-day work. So one of the issues is how do you distinguish a core team member from somebody that's actually doing an InnoSource contribution? And there's various ways you can do this by trying to identify a team. Sometimes it's a manual list, sometimes you can get it out of your system. There's no one answer, it just depends on the systems and things that you're using. And then there's another issue where if you've got non-technical contributions that are harder. So if somebody gave an internal webinar, or if maybe somebody from the core team was mentoring somebody else, you might want to track that as an additional thing that's outside of their day job. So how can you track those metrics? You can use kind of a separate form process, or actually it's easy to track it in your issue tracker as a kind of non-technical task within that, and then the system can automatically pick it up. But there is a lot of problems around metrics once you start delving into that as well. So internal policies and processes. This covers a wide range of areas. So when you have those early adoption projects, you just want to be able to, developers just want to be able to get an environment, spin it up, start doing something and using it. And then you want to share it with other people, but then other people are worried about if I consume this project into what I'm doing and it's in a live production environment, will there be people to support it and things like that? So it's good to categorize projects as kind of fully supported, well-known issue. If you raise like a Sev 1, it will get sorted. Or there's kind of a try at best efforts, you have to support it if anything goes wrong. If there's one guy behind it, if he goes on holiday, you're kind of stuck waiting. So it's having to think about these internal policies and what kind of happens around that. There's also the policies, I think, around if people want a contribution, if people want to contribute to a project and it gets rejected because it's low quality, you may get, the chain of management come up, you complain to your manager, he complains to his manager, and then it goes to the managers, and then your team's forced to support it, like you were kind of saying. So it's trying to get that open source community where you have that discussions internally rather than going through the hierarchy structure of your organisation. Then there's community setup. People speak a lot about how important a community is. But within an organisation, in the financial services industry, there's very limited tooling and communication channels. People often ignore emails, you can't always send out newsletters easily, and then if you have apps, notifications just get muted because there's so many pop-ups that happen. So how do you then kind of maintain a community? What do you do to actually keep it active? People are kind of keen on community calls to get people together virtually, but then how do you account for different time zones? And then something comes up, people don't do it, you record it, who actually goes and watches the recording afterwards? There's all this kind of stuff to consider. Something I found helpful was to try and jump on board with other events that are happening. So if there's a big tech week or something like that happening within your organisation, approach the organisers and see if you can make InnoSource a part of that. If somebody's doing a hackathon event or something like that, try and speak to them to get InnoSource mentioned within that. If there's other kind of newsletters that go out monthly or whatever, see if you can get your article included within that rather than you having to send out a separate thing yourself. Then lack of resources for operational activities, so setting up InnoSource program office, or even like you were saying, if you've just got a team and there isn't many people, that is actually a real struggle within organisations. So within Citi, it's just me kind of working on InnoSource, and I'm also doing open source things as well. And I could, recruit a team and have this silo effect, which I don't think is good. I think it's more beneficial, which is what we're doing. It's just finding those champions within an organisation. It is the passion for open source, the willingness to contribute and to grow that community that really drives it. So by having champions in different regions and in different groups around the organisation, you're having people that do go above and beyond their day jobs to try and help and to make this happen. And I need people from all areas. So I've got like some developers, I can ask them to help do some code, but I've also got connections with the communications teams and like other community builders within the company as well. So you kind of want these people from different groups that if you have a question or something comes up, you can go on them to pull for advice on. So that was a lot of challenges that, that you can face, and there's many, many more as well. So now we'll look at how InnoSource prepares you for open source contribution. So InnoSource is about applying open source software development practices internally with an organisation. So now you're familiar with things like opening up repositories, using issue trackers and things like that. You understand what a README file is. You go to there to realise how you build your programme, and then also how you can contribute code of conduct files, all this kind of stuff. So you're familiar with all this terminology. You then also realise that different projects have their own rules and processes to follow. So some people may want to have a discussion prior to you doing a contribution. So this kind of goes back to the point as well that to help reduce those poor quality contributions, rather than somebody spending loads of time like working on a feature, then submitting it and it getting rejected, if you can speak to the community earlier on, propose your idea, tell them what you're doing, and getting some early reviews, that might help prevent that as well. Some people do that, some don't, so that depends. And then you've got that cross-functional team discussions. So this is where, kind of the example I just gave, and if you want to do that in the open source communities, you need to be able to collaborate and talk to other teams as well, not just kind of do it what you want in your own way. And then you can participate in open source communities to talk about InnoSource. So I'd like to encourage people to join the FINOS InnoSource SIG. I think this happens the second Tuesday of every month, and there's a group that talks about InnoSource specific to the financial services industry. And then we've also got the InnoSource Commons, which is a great organisation. They've got loads of patterns that you can use. So one thing I often do is if I'm working on developing something, so they've got templates, for example, for README files and contributing to MD files. So you can kind of use those things if you want to, I can't think of any examples, but if you want to do something, I always kind of search there and look to see what's available and then adapt it to suit my needs. And I'd also recommend they've got a Slack group that's really good to join. And I've previously asked some questions in there, and then I've got like 6 different responses, but they're people from different organisations, so their perspectives are quite varied. And it's really interesting to get those different viewpoints. A lot of them are valid, but you think, oh, that doesn't apply to my organisation, but it's a good, interesting point, and it's a good way to get some other perspectives as well. So I've kind of whizzed through those quite quickly, but I wanted to make time I had time for some questions. Yes?
Have you encountered any anti-patterns, like situations where you would recommend against trying to InnoSource?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
I'm sorry. Have you encountered any anti-pattern situations where you would recommend against trying to InnoSource, even if there's some benefit perceived in that?
Yeah, I think so why would you not InnoSource is if your kind of project isn't a suitable one, if you haven't got the resources and time to commit to it, and like if you're, you kind of need to have your manager buy-in to allow you to do this. If they're like, no, you must focus on what you're doing, it's not really going to work. So I think you need to have like the suitable project, have it to a high quality. If you're just going to like InnoSource every single project within your organisation, some of them are going to have out-of-date libraries and all this stuff. So you have to be able to maintain it and have it to a good standard, really. Yep.
My question is about the key people. Shouldn't agree?
Sorry, I can't hear. Let me just come.
Sorry. My question is about the key people. Shouldn't a greater descriptor of good InnoSource be that there are no key people? So if there are key people you have to talk to, is it InnoSource?
That is true, but with open source projects, you still have kind of maintainers for that project. So if you have questions or you want to know how that project's working. But that's one of the things that we were looking at. It's kind of different internally within an organisation. You have to have like a project that has a budget that's leading that going forwards. And then people are kind of consuming off that budget. And then the issue with support and maintenance comes up where people aren't necessarily doing that. There's things like chargeback models you can get to distribute that cost of maintenance within an organisation. But then internally, you really do have to have someone with the funds to do it. But the other side of that is that we have these kind of early stage projects where there may be one or two people working on some innovative idea, and they may get a certain way, and then they may just want to kind of like dump that project because they finished whatever they were doing. But it could still be valuable for someone in, I don't know, 6 months' time to find that project and pick it up and continue working on it. And as long as it's well documented, there's things in place to do PR approvals and all this kind of stuff, it can be a community-based driven one. So when you talk about key people looking after the project, it just depends. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It just depends on your organisation.
Just to clarify, I don't mean like the developers and maintainers, more like the red tape or the executives kind of stuff.
What's that? Sorry, I can't hear.
So not necessarily the developers or maintainers, like having to talk to some MD or some director. It should, a good enough source not be that you don't have to speak to these people that actually get their things. I guess you can't say this.
Yeah, so when it comes to the leadership team, should we say, you kind of need them to be on board to implement the programme in the first place, to kind of roll it out and get, you know, somebody like me to come and manage the programme or something. But actually a lot of these projects starting from grassroots. So when they kind of looked for the first project that was there, it was already an inner source project. There were already teams collaborating, doing things. It's quite unusual to, especially a company as big as Citi, to find that there's no one collaborating on two projects. So there tends to be some really cool projects that the business invests, you know, money in to keep it going. It's quite a big team doing it, and there's several departments and things using it, and they tend to be really good inner source projects because the collaboration is happening already. And they often do have community calls and things like that that you can kind of jump on board with. Did you have a question as well? Let me just come closer.
Sorry, you mentioned about catalogs where people discover the projects developed for inner source, right? Is this something that you guys develop internally, or some sort of toolings that you use?
On the Inner Source Commons website, there is a catalogue that has been created by the community that you can take from GitHub and implement it yourself. But we wanted to do something a bit complicated that integrates with all our kind of different tooling, and it didn't quite meet our requirements. So we're building it from scratch, and we're expanding it to do other things as well, not just inner source aspects. But if you want to start out from scratch, there is stuff available out there for you to kind of implement yourself.
Just jumping on that, so do you enforce version management and lifecycle management for support? So where an inner source project gets to a certain size, then you expect a certain SLA response, and therefore are you on the current version and all of these stuff that we've always done with commercial software?
We're not that mature yet.
But are you thinking about pushing for that sort of?
Yeah, we're looking into it. It's basically, at the moment, we're kind of letting projects do what they want. So some of them are finding these kind of issues, and we're working with them to try and get some more of that stuff in place. But at the same time, it comes back down to the resources. Well, yeah, we can have SLAs, but then where do we get the resources to do this? We can't just jump on. And like at the same time, you know, that's your project. I've got my own stuff to look after, isn't it? So
where it's getting interesting for us on Jake Morgan, by the way, is that regulators need us to have an asset management register. And so if you create software that's then being used by multiple teams, there's a requirement to actually manage that asset and be able to discover it. So if you then get a bug, who's like from classic CVE, who's responsible to fix the CVE then? Is it the team that actually are using the software or the one that originated it? And so unless you get that structure agreed up front, there's this massive argument when it comes up as to who's going to fix it,
Yeah.
what the SLA is going to be.
that's part of the reason why at the start we want to have that project team lead, just to handle any issues like that. You've got somebody responsible, and it doesn't all just fall on me.
I totally agree with you, but one massive thing is top down. So I think it's one of those examples where if you don't get top down leadership giving the response behind to support developers and encourage it, it's not going anywhere because they don't see any kudos for actually supporting these other teams. Yeah, it should be the other way around. They should be getting bonuses for doing that, and then that's a really big one.
Yeah. It's when you start out.
Everyone's laughing now. It's quite big,
when you start out, things are good, and then as you get bigger, there's more and more challenges like that come up. Really.
It feels like the market's maturing enough, though, where a certain leadership is recognizing the importance of developers and the developer community, as opposed to, say, even 5 years ago. Leadership was more focused on, say, networking and more of a TCP/IP mindset, whereas we're seeing that it seems to have evolved.
Yeah, and the other thing for me that I think should have evolved, I've not heard anyone say this, so we're a big organisation, we've got central teams that provide solutions, they should be inner sourced. So you should have an inner source central team, so all the other LOBs that go, why aren't you meeting our requirements, can just code it. And say, here's the PR with the coding solution for you. And and then all the central team's got to do is coordinate.
To that point, we do that right now with like corporate technologies teams, and you know, if you need certain corporate technology solutions, you go to a centralized source and get all of that, so.
But we just argue and they don't do it.
Was there another question?
I was going to ask about maturity, because you say you're fairly early in the journey. Louis and I discussed this before within our organisation. We're sort of at the stage really at the moment where you're relying on engineer enthusiasm inside a desk and just go for it, can we go for it? And of course where you want to get to is that the organisation is sold on the advantages here, and that you can go to feature teams, they can go, yes, we'll get involved because we know that overall we're going to, and there's that Rubicon to be crossed about, you know, where that change happens.
Yeah.
Without giving away any trade secrets, how far do you think you are on that journey, and how can everyone in this room expedite that journey from enthusiasm to corporate enthusiasm, developer enthusiasm to corporate enthusiasm?
Like, one of the good or bad things is Citi is a large organisation, so there's loads of developers. Some aren't going to be on board and some are. So rather than trying to convince those that aren't on board, we've just been focusing on working with those that are, and kind of, you know, ignoring the other ones that aren't. So we're kind of at that stage where we've got that enthusiasm, we're working with them, we're working to support them and just improve our process as we go along. And the kind of, as we share the success stories, and we've got real stories to share with, you know, leaders about what kind of changes we're making, it helps to get the leadership buy-in a bit more as well, to then do those stuff. So I think with the maturity, you're kind of maturing in somewhat, but then we haven't, you know, converted other areas. So there's a lot of back and forth that you can kind of go with.
Oh, sorry, that other questions go on.
Okay.
So I had a question. You know, there's been a bit of talk about having central teams that own some of these things. I wanted to ask about how you handle forks, because you have these central projects, and then there's an inner source contribution, or there's a request from a team that might have a very specific use case. Perhaps they have a very particular to their business use case that isn't necessarily something you want to be in a generic inner source solution. And that's when you have the whole conversation around requirements and design, and sometimes it can end up with the change being rejected. At that point, the developers can just go and fork the project, make their own one. At that point, it diverges. There are no of the fixes and patches going into the main project. They're not hitting the second one. And then when they have an issue, there can be a kind of support where it ends up going back to the original team for help, even though there's been no versions. And that's just like, that's an offshoot of a very positive thing, which is that there's the freedom to kind of build your own stuff. But how do you encourage teams to have, how do you handle that problem of trying not to build very specific features into these generic projects?
Yeah, one of the things as well, when I talk about what is a project, you could have multiple repositories. Sometimes some projects just have certain repositories that are in a source and other ones aren't. It gets a bit complicated when it's kind of crossover of the code and it impacts other areas. I don't think I have a good answer for you at the moment, but it is something to look at, and we kind of do it on a project by project basis, so it's up to that project to determine what they want to do. So.
Can I offer a technical solution to that one, which I took from my open source experience. Years and years and years ago, got into open source, I had an itch to scratch, I did the classic thing, I submitted a PR with all the tests and things, and the maintainer came back with, lovely, but no thank you, I'm not putting it in. But what he had done is he had done the extension model for me. He said, what you do is you go for this extension model. You use this point here and you contribute there. And that is a model you see all over open source in one form or another. And there's no reason not to do that internally. And then what you do is, if you get your PR bounced, you go, right, well, I'll plug into this. You ask for an extension model that will be maintained, they give you an API, however, you implement it. Then you've got to keep that maintenance burden, but that's within your own team. And then the commitment on the inner source side is simply that they maintain that extension point. And then that also gives you the opportunity later, if other people want to do it, at that point there might be an argument to move it into the core product.
Or keep a contract project, which brings it all full circle. You've now got that plugin. Open source separately, which is great as well.
Yeah, but I mean that works open source globally, so it will definitely work, on a scale of open source. Sorry.
I think we're over time. Was this session supposed to end a few minutes ago? I don't know if there's another speaker.
Yeah, you know what? Live in the crowd.
But yeah, if there's more questions, I'm going to be around, so feel free just to approach me and ask what you want. Thank you, everyone.